London, 1936. Winston Churchill sits alone in his study at Chartwell, his country estate in Kent. He is 61 years old. He is not in government. He has not held a cabinet position in 7 years. Most politicians consider him a relic, a man whose time has passed. The newspapers mock him. His own party ignores him. But Churchill is not thinking about his political career. He is thinking about Germany. On his desk lies a stack of intelligence reports, newspaper clippings, and diplomatic cables. They tell a story that no one in Britain wants to hear. Germany is rearming. Factories that were supposed to produce tractors are producing tanks. Airfields that were supposed to be civilian are training fighter pilots. Shipyards that were supposed to build merchant vessels are building warships. And leading this transformation is a man who, 7 years earlier, was an unemployed failed artist living in a Viennese flophouse. Adolf Hitler. Churchill lights a cigar. He reads through the reports again. The numbers are staggering. In 1933, Germany had no air force. By 1936, it has over 2 Zero aircraft. In 1933, Germany had an army of 100 Zero men, restricted by the Treaty of Versailles. By 1936, it has an army of over 500 Zero, with plans to expand to 3 million. In 1933, Germany had no tanks. By 1936, it has hundreds, with more being built every month. How is this possible? Germany was bankrupt. In 1923, hyperinflation destroyed the currency. A loaf of bread cost billions of marks. People carried money in wheelbarrows. The economy collapsed. In 1929, the Great Depression struck. Unemployment soared to 6 million. Banks failed. Businesses closed. Germany was a broken nation, humiliated by defeat in the First World War, crippled by reparations and paralyzed by political chaos. And yet, in less than a decade, Hitler has transformed that broken nation into the most powerful military force in Europe. Churchill understands what this means. He has studied history. He knows that nations do not build armies for defense. They build them for conquest. He knows that Hitler is not rearming to protect Germany. He is rearming to expand it. And Churchill knows that Britain is not ready. He stands and walks to the window. Outside, the English countryside is peaceful. Green fields, quiet villages. A world that believes the Great War was the war to end all wars, that peace is permanent, that Germany is no longer a threat. Churchill knows they are wrong. He knows that war is coming, and he knows that no one is listening to him. How did Hitler do it? How did a bankrupt nation with no army, no air force, and no heavy industry become a military superpower in less than a decade? The answer is not simple. It is a combination of deception, economic manipulation, ideological mobilization, and ruthless efficiency. It is a story of how a totalitarian regime can transform a society faster than a democracy can respond. And it begins not with Hitler, but with the Treaty of Versailles. June 28, 1919, the Palace of Versailles, outside Paris. The First World War has been over for 7 months. The victorious Allies, Britain, France, and the United States, gather to impose peace terms on Germany. The German delegation is not invited to negotiate. They are summoned to sign. The Treaty of Versailles is not a peace treaty. It is a punishment. Germany is forced to accept full responsibility for the war. It loses 13% of its territory. It loses all its colonies. It loses the coal-rich Saar region, the industrial Ruhr, and the port of Danzig. The provinces of Alsace and Lorraine are returned to France. Parts of eastern Germany are given to the newly created nation of Poland, cutting off East Prussia from the rest of the country. But the territorial losses are only the beginning. Germany is ordered to pay reparations, compensation for the damage caused by the war. The amount is set at 132 billion gold marks, equivalent to over 400 billion in today's currency. It is a sum Germany cannot possibly pay. The German economy is in ruins. Millions of men are dead. Cities are damaged. Industry is disrupted. And now the Allies demand that Germany rebuild Europe at its own expense. Worse still, the treaty dismantles Germany's military. The army is limited to 100 Auserren men, a police force, not a fighting force. The navy is reduced to a few coastal defense ships. Submarines are banned. The air force is abolished. Germany is forbidden from manufacturing tanks, heavy artillery, poison gas, or military aircraft. The Rhineland, the border region with France, is demilitarized. No German soldiers are allowed there. The treaty is designed to ensure that Germany can never threaten Europe again. But it has the opposite effect. It creates rage, humiliation, and a hunger for revenge. In Germany, the treaty is called the Diktat, the dictate. It is not accepted as legitimate. It is seen as an unjust imposition by foreign powers on a defeated nation. Politicians who sign it are called traitors. Veterans feel betrayed. The war, they believe, was not lost on the battlefield. It was lost because of politicians, communists and Jews, who stabbed Germany in the back. This is the myth Adolf Hitler uses to rise to power. He does not invent the myth. It is already there, simmering in the beer halls and veterans' clubs of Bavaria, but he gives it a voice, he gives it a target, and he gives it a plan. Hitler is a nobody. He was born in Austria in 1889. He dropped out of school at 16. He tried to become an artist and failed. He lived in Vienna, sleeping in homeless shelters, selling postcards to survive. When the First World War began in 1914, he joined the German army. He served as a messenger, carrying orders between units. He was wounded twice. He was decorated for bravery. He loved the army. It gave him purpose, structure, identity. When the war ended, he was devastated. After the war, he drifted. He stayed in Munich. He joined the German Workers' Party, a tiny nationalist group with fewer than 50 members. He discovered he had a talent. He could speak. He could hold an audience. He could make people believe. Within 2 years, he became the leader of the party. He renamed it the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi Party. His message was simple. Germany was betrayed. The Treaty of Versailles was a crime. The politicians who signed it were criminals. The communists and Jews who undermined the war effort must be destroyed. Germany must rearm. Germany must reclaim its territory. Germany must become strong again. At first, no one took him seriously. In 1923, he tried to seize power in Munich in a coup known as the Beer Hall Putsch. It failed. He was arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison. He served 9 months. While in prison, he wrote a book, Mein Kampf, My Struggle. In it, he laid out his vision. Germany needed Lebensraum, living space. It needed to expand eastward into Poland and Russia. It needed to destroy its enemies, communists, Jews, and democracies. It needed a strong leader who could unite the nation and make it powerful again. No one read the book. It sold poorly. Hitler was dismissed as a crank, a failed revolutionary, a man with no future. But he was patient. He rebuilt the Nazi Party. He competed in elections. He gave speeches. He built a following. And he waited. Then came the Great Depression. In 1929, the American stock market crashed. Banks failed, trade collapsed, unemployment soared, the economic crisis spread across the world. In Germany, the impact was catastrophic. By 1932, 6 million Germans were unemployed. The government was paralyzed. Political parties fought in the streets. Communists and Nazis battled for control. The democratic system was collapsing. Hitler saw his opportunity. He campaigned relentlessly. He promised jobs. He promised order. He promised to restore Germany's pride. He blamed the depression on the Treaty of Versailles, on weak politicians, on foreign powers, and people believed him. In the 1932 elections, the Nazi Party became the largest party in the Reichstag, the German parliament. On January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. He was 43 years old. He had never held political office. He had no experience in government, but within 2 months, he had destroyed German democracy and made himself dictator. He did it legally. He used the Reichstag fire, an arson attack on the Parliament building, as an excuse to pass the Enabling Act, which gave him the power to rule by decree. He banned opposition parties. He arrested communists, socialists, and trade unionists. He took control of the police, the courts, and the press. By the summer of 1933, Germany was a totalitarian state, and Hitler began to rearm. The Treaty of Versailles forbade it, but Hitler did not care. He understood that treaties are only as strong as the will to enforce them, and he knew that Britain and France, exhausted by the Great War, had no will to enforce anything. He began cautiously. In 1933, Germany withdrew from the League of Nations and the World Disarmament Conference. It was a test. The League protested. France threatened. Britain hesitated. But no one acted. Hitler had learned something important. The Allies would not fight to stop him. He accelerated. In 1935, he announced that Germany was rebuilding its air force, the Luftwaffe. The Treaty of Versailles forbade it. But Hitler declared the treaty void. Britain and France protested. They issued statements. They held meetings. But they did nothing. In 1935, Hitler reintroduced conscription. The army, limited to 100 Lohrseeren men, would be expanded to 550 000. Again, the Allies protested. Again, they did nothing. In 1936, Hitler remilitarized the Rhineland. German troops marched into the demilitarized zone along the French border. It was a direct violation of the treaty. It was a provocation. If France had responded with force, the German army would have retreated. Hitler later admitted that if the French had moved, he would have been finished. But France did not move. Britain advised restraint, and Hitler's gamble succeeded. Churchill watched all of this. He warned the British government. He gave speeches in Parliament. He wrote articles in newspapers. He pleaded with Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin and later Neville Chamberlain to confront Hitler before it was too late. But he was ignored. The government believed that Hitler's grievances were legitimate. They believed that the Treaty of Versailles had been too harsh. They believed that if Germany's reasonable demands were met, peace could be preserved. Churchill knew they were wrong. He knew that Hitler was not interested in fairness. He was interested in power, and he was building the means to seize it. But how was Hitler paying for rearmament? Germany was bankrupt. The reparations debt was crippling. Unemployment was massive. Where was the money coming from? The answer lay in the work of one man, Hjalmar Schacht, Hitler's Minister of Economics and President of the Reichsbank. Schacht was a financial genius. He devised a system that allowed Germany to rearm without triggering inflation or alerting foreign observers. It was based on deception, barter, and the creation of phantom money. First, Schacht created a parallel currency called the Mefo bill. These were essentially IOUs issued by a shell company called the Metallurgische Forschungsgesellschaft, the Metallurgical Research Corporation. The government used Mefo bills to pay armaments manufacturers. The manufacturers could redeem the bills at the Reichsbank for real money. But because the bills circulated as a form of credit, they did not appear in the official budget. Germany was spending billions on rearmament, but on paper, the budget looked balanced. Second, Schacht negotiated barter agreements with countries in Eastern Europe and Latin America. Germany would trade manufactured goods for raw materials, iron, oil, rubber, food. No money changed hands, no foreign currency was needed. Germany could import the resources it needed for rearmament without depleting its reserves. Third, Schacht imposed strict controls on foreign exchange. German citizens were forbidden from holding foreign currency. Imports were restricted. Exports were subsidized. The goal was to make Germany economically self-sufficient, autarkic. If war came, Germany would not be dependent on foreign trade. The system worked, By 1936, unemployment had fallen from 6 million to 1 million. Factories were running at full capacity. Roads, bridges, and public buildings were being constructed. The Autobahn, the world's first highway network, was under construction. Germany looked like a nation reborn. But beneath the surface, the economy was a house of cards. The MIFO bills were debt disguised as currency. The barter agreements were unsustainable. The controls on foreign exchange were strangling private enterprise. And the rearmament program was consuming resources faster than the economy could produce them. Schacht knew the system would collapse. He warned Hitler that Germany could not sustain rearmament indefinitely without a real economic base. Hitler did not care. He was not planning for a long-term stable economy. He was planning for war. And in war, the economy does not need to be sustainable. It only needs to last long enough to win. By 1936, Germany was producing tanks, aircraft, submarines, and artillery on a scale that shocked foreign observers. The Luftwaffe had over 2 Zerzo planes. The army was training in new tactics: combined arms, mobile warfare, coordinated air and ground attacks. The Navy was building battleships and U-boats in violation of every treaty Germany had signed. And still, Britain and France did nothing. Churchill could not understand it. He gave speech after speech in Parliament. In 1936, he warned, "Germany is arming with the utmost speed. The whole of their manufacturing capacity is turned over to the production of weapons. We are entering a period of danger." In 1937, he warned, "The German Air Force is now superior to ours. If war comes, we will not be able to defend our cities." In 1938, he warned, "We are facing the greatest danger since the invasion of Napoleon, and we are doing nothing." He was called a warmonger. He was accused of scaremongering. He was told that he was living in the past, that the world had changed, that war was no longer an option. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain believed that Hitler could be appeased. He believed that if Britain and France made reasonable concessions, Hitler would be satisfied. Churchill knew that appeasement would fail. He knew that Hitler did not want concessions. He wanted conquest. In March 1938, Hitler annexed Austria. He called it the Anschluss, the Union. German troops marched into Vienna. There was no resistance. The Austrian government collapsed. Austria ceased to exist. Germany had expanded without firing a shot. The Allies protested. They held meetings. They issued statements. But they did nothing. In September 1938, Hitler demanded that Czechoslovakia surrender the Sudetenland, a region with a large German-speaking population. Czechoslovakia refused. War seemed inevitable. But Chamberlain flew to Munich to negotiate. He met with Hitler, Mussolini, and the French Premier Édouard Daladier. Without consulting the Czechs, they agreed to Hitler's demands. The Sudetenland was handed over. Chamberlain returned to London and declared that he had achieved peace for our time. Churchill was horrified. He stood in Parliament and said, "We have sustained a total and unmitigated defeat. We are in the midst of a disaster of the first magnitude. The road to war is now open." He was right. In March 1939, Hitler violated the Munich Agreement. German troops occupied the rest of Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia ceased to exist. Hitler had lied. Appeasement had failed. Finally, Britain and France began to wake up. They issued guarantees to Poland, promising to defend it if Germany attacked. They began to accelerate their own rearmament, but they were years behind. Germany had been preparing for war since 1933. Britain and France had been hoping for peace. Churchill understood what was coming. He understood that Hitler had built a war machine out of a bankrupt nation through a combination of economic manipulation, political ruthlessness, and military innovation. He had exploited the weaknesses of the democratic powers, their fear of war, their guilt over Versailles, their belief that reason could prevail, and he had created a military force capable of conquering Europe. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war. The Second World War had begun. Churchill was brought back into government as First Lord of the Admiralty. In May 1940, after Chamberlain's government collapsed, Churchill became Prime Minister. He stood before Parliament and said, "I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears and sweat. You ask, what is our policy? I will say, it is to wage war by sea, land and air, with all our might and with all the strength that God can give us. You ask, what is our aim? I can answer in one word, victory." But even as Churchill spoke those words, the German war machine was sweeping across Europe. Poland had fallen in 4 weeks. Denmark and Norway fell in 2 months. In May 1940, Germany invaded France, Belgium and the Netherlands. The French army, considered the strongest in Europe, collapsed. By June, France had surrendered. Britain stood alone. How had this happened? How had Germany, a defeated nation in 1918, become the master of Europe in 1940? The answer lay in the years Churchill had spent warning, pleading, and being ignored. Germany had rearmed while Britain and France hoped for peace. Germany had trained its army in new tactics while Britain and France clung to the strategies of the last war. Germany had built an air force while Britain and France debated budgets. Germany had prepared for war while Britain and France prepared for negotiations. Churchill had seen it all. He had watched Hitler exploit every weakness, manipulate every compromise, and break every promise. He had watched the democratic powers fail to act when action might have stopped Hitler without war. He had watched the Treaty of Versailles, designed to prevent German rearmament, become meaningless because no one was willing to enforce it. And now, in 1940, Britain faced the consequences. Churchill stood on the cliffs of Dover and looked across the English Channel. 20 miles away, the German army waited. Invasion barges were being assembled. The Luftwaffe was preparing to destroy the Royal Air Force. If Britain fell, Hitler would control all of Europe. There would be no one left to resist him. Churchill was terrified, not for himself. He had lived a long life. He had fought in wars. He had survived political exile. He was not afraid of death, but he was terrified of defeat. He was terrified that Britain would fall, that democracy would be extinguished, that Hitler's vision of a totalitarian Europe would become reality. He was terrified because he had seen how Hitler had done it. How a bankrupt nation with no army, no air force, and no industry had become the most powerful military force in the world. How a failed artist had become a dictator. How a democracy had been destroyed from within. How lies, manipulation, and fear had been used to build a war machine. And he was terrified because he knew that if Britain lost, there would be no second chance. But Churchill did not give in to fear. He used it, he channeled it into resolve. He rallied the British people. He gave speeches that stirred the soul. He refused to negotiate. He refused to surrender. He made it clear that Britain would fight alone if necessary, that it would fight on the beaches, in the streets, in the hills, and that it would never give up, and Britain held. The Royal Air Force defeated the Luftwaffe in the Battle of Britain. The invasion was postponed. Hitler turned east and invaded the Soviet Union. The United States entered the war after Pearl Harbor. Slowly, painfully, the tide began to turn. By 1945, Germany was defeated. Hitler was dead. The war machine he had built out of a bankrupt nation was destroyed. The cities he had conquered were in ruins. The empire he had dreamed of was erased. Churchill survived. He lived to see victory. He lived to see democracy restored in Europe. But he never forgot the years he had spent warning about Hitler, being ignored, watching Germany rearm, and wondering if anyone would listen before it was too late. In his memoirs, Churchill wrote, "There was never a war in history easier to prevent by timely action than the one which has just desolated such great areas of the globe. It could have been prevented without the firing of a single shot, but no one would listen. Why was Churchill terrified? Because he saw what no one else wanted to see. He saw that Hitler was not a rational leader who could be appeased. He saw that Germany was not rearming for defense. He saw that war was coming, and he saw that Britain was not ready. How did Hitler build a war machine out of a bankrupt nation? Through deception, manipulation, and the exploitation of fear, through the use of economic tricks that disguised debt as growth, through the violation of treaties that no one was willing to enforce, through the mobilization of a population desperate for hope and willing to believe in a leader who promised strength, and through the failure of the democratic powers to act when action might have stopped him. That is the lesson of the 1930s, not that war is inevitable, but that peace requires vigilance. Not that dictators are invincible, but that they are most dangerous when they are underestimated. Not that democracies are weak, but that they are vulnerable when they lose the will to defend themselves. Churchill understood this. He warned about it. He fought against it, and in the end he was proven right. But the cost of being right was 50 million dead. That is why Churchill was terrified, because he knew what was coming, and he knew that no one was listening.